Well, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this second panel session of the Luce-Hartford Conference in Christian Muslim Relations. I am David Grafton, and I'm the Academic Dean and Professor of Islamic Studies and Christian Muslim Relations here at Hartford Seminary. You're welcome. We welcome you. A few words about Hartford Seminary. Hartford Seminary was established in 1834 in the state of Connecticut, the United States, and it is a non-denominational graduate school for religious and theological studies. And what makes us particularly unique as a seminary is we are a multi-faith seminary, and we prepare leaders for a complex and pluralistic world. We're excited that this fall we're introducing 3 new master's programs: a Master of Arts in Interreligious Studies, a Master of Arts in International Peace Building, and a Master of Arts in Chaplaincy. This builds on our long legacy of our Islamic chaplaincy program, and we now will have a master's program for that. In addition, we have a PhD program for which one of our PhD candidates will be moderating a panel for today. This is the 5th year of our Christian Muslim Relation Conference series that has been made possible through a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation, and so we're grateful to them for this opportunity. These conferences have focused on contemporary and timely issues that affect Muslim-Christian relations. In past years, we focused on issues such as refugees and forced migration, the environment, race and racism, the role of women's voices and leadership in religious communities, and this year, the pandemics. We've constructed this conference around the theme of pandemics because we recognize that in the midst of this global pandemic of COVID-19, that it has been laid over top and intertwined with the long-standing pandemic of racism in the United States and North America, and ethnic and interreligious tensions in various places around the world. And so the panel for this afternoon will be focusing on the pandemics in the Middle East, South, and Southeast Asia. And so to get us started for this session, I'd like to introduce Muhammad Abdila, who is a PhD candidate here at Hartford Seminary, who will be the moderator and will be introducing our speakers. Hello, Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Grafton, for the introductions. So as he has mentioned that the second panel is going to discuss about the Christian-Muslim relations in Indonesia, India, and Lebanon in the times of pandemic and social segregations, such as public racism, bigotry, intercommunal violence, Islamophobia, sectarian nationalism. So all of the 3 upcoming presentations will examine how Christian and Muslim communities have worked together across boundaries to overcome these public challenges. So without further ado, let's introduce our presenters in this panel. The first presentation will be by Hans Harmakaputra and Luki Rahman. Han is visiting assistant professor in comparative theology and Muslim Christian relations and Louis Field postdoctoral fellow at Hartford Seminary. He graduated from the PhD program at Boston College Theology Department. Prior to his appointment at Hartford Seminary, he was a resident scholar at the Collegeville Institute, Minnesota, for the academic year of 2019-2020. He also taught as an adjunct faculty and teaching fellow at Jakarta Theological Seminary, Indonesia, in 2013 and 2014, and then in the Emmanuel College, Boston in 2017 to 2019, and at Boston College in 2018 and 2019. His recent publications are Say No to Christmas, an analysis of the Islamic fatwa on the prohibition of wearing non-Muslims' attribute in Indonesia at the Muslim World Journal, and Fratelli Tutti and Interreligious Friendship, an Indonesian Christian reflections at the Journal of Social Encounters. The second speaker in this first presentation is Lutfi Rahman. He is a lecturer at the Faculty of Usuluddin and Humanities of UIN Wali Songo, State Islam University of Wali Songo in Semarang, Middle Java. He also served as Secretary of Rumah Moderasi Beragama, the House of Religious Moderations at this university. He earned his first master at the Islamic Ethics Department from the same university, and his second master's in Christian-Muslim relations at Harvard Seminary. He specialized in sociology, anthropology, and theology of religions. He also a member of Plakpasdam, Research and Development Unit of Nahdlatul Ulama. Nahdlatul Ulama is one of the biggest Muslim organization in Indonesia. And he is also teaches at Pondok Pesantren Darul Falah, Besongo, Semarang. And his research interests include interfaith and interreligious issue and works. So yeah, the 15 minutes is yours, Han and Lutfi. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So it is a pleasure and honor for us to present our paper alongside other esteemed panelists. And it is titled From Toleration to Solidarity, Muslim-Christian Relations in Indonesia During the Pandemic COVID-19. On April 19, 2022, two men visited a Christian family in Bekasi, West Java, Indonesia, to warn the family to refrain from worshiping in their house. The family was only following the government's order to avoid any gatherings during the pandemic of COVID-19, including a religious gathering. This is one of religious intolerant cases happened during the pandemic. On a more positive example, during Eid al-Fitr's Day on May 24, 2020, a video of 3 nuns went viral on Indonesian social media like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. They sing an Indonesian popular Eid al-Fitr song to congratulate Muslim brothers and sisters. The video garnered good favors as people highly appreciated the gesture of goodwill during the pandemic. And we will play this for some time, and then you can see the lyrics in English on the right side. So these two cases are widely known in Indonesia and demonstrate how Christian-Muslim relations are always dynamic. Our paper here will focus on the relations between Muslim and Christians during the time of pandemic COVID-19 and depicts how the pandemic has changed the patterns of interreligious relations. Here are some research questions. Is the pandemic magnifying the gap between Muslims and Christians, or instead bring them closer? How well do interreligious efforts adapt in the time of pandemic? What are the challenges and opportunities caused by the pandemic for Muslim-Christian relations? We won't have enough time to present all our findings, so we will focus on examples from 5 cities in Indonesia: Ambon, Poso, Surabaya, Bogor, and Semarang. The first two cities are considered as post-conflict areas with histories of interreligious conflicts and violence. The next two have experienced interreligious tensions, but are still generally categorized as having peaceful coexistence. The last city is an example of a city without nationally known conflict or tension between different religious communities. We did a qualitative interview to colleagues and individuals doing the grassroots works in those cities to gather the data. The first city is Ambon. The city of Ambon is the capital city of the Moluccas, a region in eastern Indonesia where severe Muslim-Christian conflicts have occurred between 1999 and 2003. Muslim and Christian militias were involved in those conflicts. The International Crisis Group estimates between 5,000 to 10,000 people have been killed and around 700,000, almost one-third of the whole population, became refugees. The situation has improved a lot in the past years. So the pandemic impedes the tradition of exchange visits between Muslims and Christians during religious holidays. So they have to utilize social media application to send their greetings. Notably, the pastors from the Moluccas Protestant Church created a video where they sing a popular Muslim song, Assalamualaikum, to congratulate Muslim brothers and sisters during Idul Fitr. Next, Reverend Eklin de Fretes ministry exemplifies public service. Before the pandemic, he started Peace Tales in 2018 to build peace through puppet shows, primarily for children. During the pandemic, he utilized social media like Instagram to broadcast virtual children's worship. The message is intentionally inclusive, so children of all faiths, especially Muslims, can benefit from the program. During Ramadan 2020, he aired storytelling sessions every Friday for Muslim kids. In January 2021, he and his team visited the victims of an earthquake in Mamuju, West Sulawesi, where Muslims were the majority. They counseled children refugees through storytelling. In terms of education, the Hekaleka Foundation consciously uses education as an entry point to bring society together. For instance, they provide training sessions for preschool teachers. Next is the cultural dimension. Ms. Rusda Lekawa, a Muslim from Morela, a Muslim village near Ambon, explains how her village has a traditional kinship relations with 3 other Christian villages, and this kinship relation is known as Pelagandong. One way to maintain the Pelagandong system is through traditional rituals. One ritual is Pukul Sapulidi that occurs during Idul Fitri. Since the pandemic began, there has been no invitation from the Christian villages due to the health protocols that prohibits large gathering. However, when Morela inaugurated a new chief and invited representatives from other Christian villages, around 100 people attended, although it's supposed to send only 10 people per village. It shows the strong bonds between people. The second city is Poso in central Sulawesi. Between 1998 to 2001, a communal violence between Muslims and Christians occurred, with approximately 500 to 1,000 deaths and 110,000 displaced people. Although formally the conflict ended in 2001, the trauma and bitterness cannot dissipate immediately. Poso is currently peaceful, even though the central Sulawesi province is still preoccupied with the issue of terrorism, which has caused several unrests, including the most recent one in November 2020 in Sigi, where Muslim extremists killed a Christian family. To ease the tension after the tragedy, local religious leaders hosted an interreligious prayer. A small number of religious leaders gathered in person following COVID health protocol and then broadcasted the prayer online through Facebook. The picture below here is a different interreligious prayer organized by several women organizations. Proponents of civil society, especially women, have assumed vital roles in healing and breaking the cycle of violence in the post-conflict era in Poso. During the pandemic, social media also helped interaction between people to inquire about each other's well-being and exchange greetings during religious celebrations. Furthermore, several Muslim and Christian religious leaders hosted social media campaigns for COVID vaccines. They also responded to the natural disaster in the neighbor province by collecting funds and goods. And in this picture here on the right is Sintuwulemba, a village outside Poso. Here, Muslims came to the church to help clean up before Christmas celebration. And afterward, during the New Year 2021, Christians took a turn in visiting Muslims and clean up the mosque. This place, Sintuwulemba, used to be the epicenter of the propaganda to rally Muslims due to a Muslim school massacre by an extremist Christian group during the conflict. And now, my colleague Lutfi will continue.
Thank you, Dr. Hans. I will present the other three cities remain. Surabaya, I believe this is the place or the city where the moderator lives and stays. Surabaya is the capital of the East Java province. The city is famous for its religious toleration. However, in May 2018, a series of bombing attacks at 5 different locations, including 3 local churches, killed at least 13 people and injured dozens. The perpetrators of these suicide bombers were a family of 6 inspired by ISIS. Civil society, including religious leaders, are working hard to improve interreligious commitment and solidarity. During the pandemic, interreligious activities and educational programs have shifted to a combination of online and in-person. During Ramadan and Eidul Fitr, Christians visited mosques, Muslims community in villages and Islamic boarding schools. Then, in December 2020, some Muslim helped Christians decorate a Christmas tree at a local Catholic church. Unlike a regular Christmas tree, this one has hundreds of masks and bottles of hand sanitizer or as ornaments as a reminder to remain vigilant of the dangers of COVID-19. The committee Nur Khalis said this is a regular event because Christians also help Muslims with parking and coordinating traffic during the Eid al-Fitr prayer. In terms of public services, some churches joined the program of making face shields. Volunteers learned how to make face shields through a YouTube video and then distributed them, including to non-Christians. All Christian symbols are omitted to make them acceptable for non-Christians. There are online also interreligious events. Religious leaders of different religious traditions organize a weekly Zoom meeting called Indonesia Merayakan Perbedaan, or Indonesia Celebrates Diversity, accessible for public on different themes. Another famous interreligious group is a network of interreligious people inspired by the late Rahman, the former president of Indonesia and the prominent Muslim figure called Gus Durian. The group has networks in many cities, so Surabaya is only one of their chapters. On December 29, 2020, Gus Durian Surabaya co-organized a live streaming of Christmas service along with the annual memorial service of Gus Dur via Zoom. The event consisted of reflection and prayers from Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Confucian, and a follower of indigenous religion. The next city is Bogor. In Bogor, Reverend Darwin Darmawan states that Muslim-Christian relationship has shown signs of improvement because of COVID-19. It served as a common enemy. Interreligious leaders gather for an interfaith prayer at the end of the year in the city hall. It was an on-site event adherent to the health protocols, but it was also broadcast online. On February 4, 2021, local interreligious leaders signed the Declaration of Human Friendship at the Bogor Cathedral to commemorate the International Day of Human Fraternity initiated by Pope Francis. In terms of public service, an interfaith group called the Mutual Cooperation Movement fed poor people, number around 1,000 people for 30 days at the beginning of the pandemic. They cooperated with small food stalls to distribute the food, so the program helped small businesses too. And the last city, Semarang, the city where I live now, the capital of Central Java, received the Harmony Award from the Ministry of Religious Affairs because the city has succeeded in sustaining harmony between different religious communities and cultures. The provincial government establishes a well-constructed web of communication between religious leaders. In the picture, the Governor Ganjar Pranowo hosted an interreligious prayer at the beginning of the pandemic. Besides the government's involvement, civil society groups play active role to maintain interreligious relation. Events are held in person by observing the health protocol or online. In this picture, Gus Durian Semarang and another interreligious organization visited and placed Christmas greeting banners outside the church and in public spaces. On another occasion, a pastor is invited as one of the speakers in the Maulid celebration hosted by Wali Songo State Islamic University. The event was a moment of spiritual gathering and prayer for the nation to overcome the pandemic. For an example of public service, there was a blood donation event sponsored by various organizations. It aims to educate and mobilize the general public to continue donating blood while adhering to the health protocols. This has been necessary since the amount of blood stock has been depleting since the pandemic began. And the conclusion will be continued by Hans, please.
To conclude our presentation, we note several opportunities and challenges caused by the pandemic for Muslim-Christian relations in Indonesia. First of all, the emergence of online platform presents new possibilities for interreligious engagements, such as wider public attention, wider scope, more access, and more creativity. The challenge is that they could not entirely replace in-person encounter. Related to this, the next challenge is digital literacy, where discrepancy exists between people based on ages, educational, and economic level. As a result, negative contents such as hoaxes and interreligious polemics also multiplied along with positive contents. Thus, there is necessity of intentional education on digital literacy, and we have found some example of this, and to produce more positive contents on internet. And this is related to the next challenge. Third, interreligious engagements start to weave intersectional dimensions apart from religious identity. And this is related to the next challenge, where interreligious engagements are often perceived to be elitist endeavors because the proponents are mostly religious leaders. It is necessary for people to be included and to play a significant role in interreligious engagement. The last challenge is that the pandemic justifies religious communities to live in seclusion and to focus on themselves. On the other side, we find that the pandemic brings people together as they see it as common enemy, and they demonstrate solidarity with others, as can be seen from different forms of public services. So our research demonstrate grassroots Muslim, Christians, and adherents of other religious traditions endeavor to build relationship and establish interreligious cooperation instead of preserving the distance between them. Obviously, our research is far from exhaustive, yet we hope it can capture the current Christian-Muslim relations in Indonesia during the pandemic. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hans and Lutfi, for the presentations. Yeah, I will keep the questions later for the attendance. If you have questions to the presenters, please click the Q&A box and write your question there, and you can address to whom you are questioning. And yeah, the speakers can also check if there's questions for you. So yeah, and next we are going to the second presentations will be by Alan Joseph. Mr. Alan Joseph is the Dean of Academics at Ebenezer Theological Seminary in Kerala, India. He was ordained as a minister to the Pentecostal Church in India. He worked as the Dean and Principal of Pentecostal Seminary in northern part of Kerala, which is the second largest Muslim district in India after Kashmir. He lived in Saudi Arabia along with his wife and daughter for 3 years and taught in a school there. He has an MA in Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations from Hartford Seminary, and in 2019, and graduate certificate of International Peacemaking Program, also from Hartford Seminary in 2016. Also, he holds postgraduate diploma in Islamic Studies and Interfaith Relations in 2013 from Henry Martin Institute, and the Master of Divinity from ASEAN Institute of Theology, Bangalore in 2004, and Bachelor of Theology from Gospel for Asia Biblical Seminary. So, Mr. Alan, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Abdila, and I'm so delighted to be able to participate in this wonderful conference. And I'm also so happy to be able to join to this esteemed panel. The talk for the presentation for tonight from my side is looking into see how does the Malayali Pentecostal Church, both in the US and also in Kerala, try to experiment with fundamentalism, traditionalism, and pastoral politics during the COVID era. Now, in order to understand who are Malayali Pentecostals, we need to have a little bit of background knowledge about who they are. They are actually Malayali Pentecostals are so called because they speak a language called Malayalam, which is the language of Kerala, which I have highlighted in orange in the Indian map. As you can see, this land is surrounded by Indonesian Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. Because of that proximity, it is believed that this is where St. Thomas said to have, landed in 52 Common Era. And later on, when Islam, this is the same place where Islam was introduced, first of all. And similarly, later on, during the 15th century, toward the end of the 15th century, this is where exactly Vasco da Gama reached. So compared to the rest of the Indian state, this is one of the few states where Christians have some sort of numeric, political, social, economic significance. The history of Pentecostalism in India is a little bit complicated because in Kerala, particularly has a long history of Christianity. Even if you don't believe in, just like many people, even if you don't believe in the arrival of St. Thomas, but still then there are Christians, at least from the 4th century in this land. And so this church used to have some connection with the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox patriarchs, different patriarchates actually. And later on, with the arrival of Portuguese, the church in Kerala began to develop the connection with the Roman Catholic Church. Now, toward the beginning of the 20th century, There was also a report of an indigenous Pentecostal revival that happened. This is prior to the Azusa Street revival in 1906. So there was a kind of an indigenous revival that happened in Mukti Mission, run by Pandita Ramabai, who was a Brahmin convert to Christianity. And then the Azusa Street revival sent missionaries to different parts of the world, including to India. And initially, it was actually not to Kerala. The first Pentecostal missionaries from Azusa came. It was to Bangalore and Bengal. But later on, the denominational history of Indian Pentecostalism started with an independent American missionary named Robert Cook. He had so many associates, and one of them, K. Abraham, is so important because he has somehow become the face of indigenous Pentecostalism in Kerala. And now, from the very beginning, the Kerala Pentecostals had issues with the caste hierarchy. There were so many people converted from the Dalits, the lower caste background, into Pentecostal mission. But then, initially at least, majority of them were from the age-old Christian, the so-called Syrian Christian, Thomas Christian background. So that tension is very important. Now, if you want to trace the history of Christian-Muslim relations in Kerala, from the 7th century to the arrival of Portuguese in the 15th century, you can just neglect it. It's not a big deal. But then from the arrival of the Portuguese, things began to change. There are so many reasons. Portuguese people wanted to control the maritime trade. And this maritime trade in the Indian Ocean was so far controlled by the Muslims. And when I say Muslims, I mean the local Muslims and then the Arabs. So the Portuguese naturally did not believe. They had this natural animosity toward the local Muslims. And you also need to understand the history of crusades, So so what I'm trying to say is that, from the arrival of Portuguese, it began to change forever. And then the English people came, the British came, and this became all the more worsened because unlike the Portuguese, unlike the Catholics, the British Protestant missionaries and the British reign began to conspicuously neglect Muslims, and they began to show favoritism to Christians. And then, there were British missionaries who used to engage in anti-Islamic polemics, and this resulted so many tensions. And then toward the beginning of the 20th century, when Pentecostalism was established as a denomination, they had this dispensationalist premillenarial view of eschatology, especially with the establishing of Israel's homeland after the Second World War. So this further alienated Christians and Muslims apart. Now, I just want to slightly look into the travel of this Keralite Pentecostals, otherwise known as Malayali Pentecostals, into the US. There were so many Kerala Malayali Pentecostal missionaries prior to 1950 in the US. There were reports of so many people visiting, but then the large-scale migration started, as we all know, post the 1965 immigration change, immigration regulations. And then prior to that, or along with the Malayali Pentecostals, there was another group of people who were also trying to migrate to the US, which was the Marthoma Christians, who had better ecumenical connections with the American missionaries and big churches like Episcopal churches and things like that. But when they reached there, although they were prior to the Pentecostals, they did not establish a church there in the US. It was the Pentecostals who established their church in 1965. Later on, only in 1975, that the Mathamites were able to establish their church. Now, Malayali Pentecostals in the Baltic space. How do you identify a Malayali Pentecostal? Some of you may be wondering, I haven't seen any. That is very difficult because in the American public square, you wouldn't notice the difference because they would look like any other South Asian or just like any other people. But then if you are able to study them, their congregations or their family and how their children behave and stuff like that, you would understand that they are traditionalists, fundamentalists, and they have, close cultural religious associations with their own people. And they also stay away from American Indian controversies because of identity politics. They don't want to be involved with the identity politics of Hindutva or the Hindu fundamentalist discourse. And but however, they are a strong community. They have an ongoing family conference that has been running for 35 long years, and at least 5,000 people attend in that conference every year. And what do they believe? They are, just like any other ultra evangelicals. They are puritanical. They are fundamental. They believe in. They have ecstatic worship. The biblical preaching is a centrality. Gender segregation you can observe there. They insist that the women, especially, dress traditionally in the congregation, and the role of women in the church in this congregation is problematic. And in other words, they have an exclusive theology. They believe in dispensationalist, millenarian, discourse. They don't like ecumenism actually, and they have found that for the fundamentalist discourse, America is a better place. Now, how do you make? What do they do actually? They are actually just like any other immigrant community. You would know that they are constantly referring to the land, which is Kerala, the land I was talking about. And they also cherish the myth of return, just like many first-generation immigrants. And there is a tendency of sending the second generation to study in the Bible colleges in Kerala. And there is a long history of itinerant preachers from Kerala visiting the American churches. And they also involve and engage in transnational politics. And what did they do during this COVID pandemic era? Traditionally, it is believed and it is viewed that Pentecostals are traditionalists. So, but then the interesting thing is that this Pentecostals generally, from the very beginning, never shied away from using technology. So when the pandemic hit, they were quick to embrace social media, especially the Zoom call. What do they do? What do they preach? They employed preachers from Kerala to preach in the Zoom conferences, both here in the home country and also in the American diaspora churches. What do they preach? They just preach the normal stuff like we are in America because God has blessed us. We are in America and we have a mission to this country, meaning to America. We are in America, or you are in America, and you have a responsibility to your home country, which is Kerala or India. Those are the normal jargons of the preaching. But on a closer analysis, you would see that they were trying to do something else, meaning they have been already occupied with issues like multiculturalism and hybridity, especially in their younger generation. They had that struggle. And then the first generation, or maybe the second generation, they also wanted to reproduce culture. So there is an attempt of cultural reproduction, which they have been already doing. And then, my qualitative research proved that there is kind of an attempt to become the strong contenders of model minority position in the US. And as you're aware, when Asian Americans are striving for, if they are striving for model minority position, we know that that is going to be at the expense of Black people. And when a Malayali Pentecostal is trying to get that position, the model minority, or even the Indian Hindus are trying to, if they are trying to achieve that position, we know that is going to be at the expense of Muslims. So what do we make use of the Zoom calls? I'm not saying that what all they preached is this, many of the Zoom call preachings had the anti-Islamic rhetoric. And I have been observing for the last 10 years of young people, becoming more and more, the tendency of becoming, anti-Muslim is growing among the young people, among the Kerala Pentecostals. And then there is something called the love jihad conspiracy. And now love jihad conspiracy is a controversy that happens in this land of Kerala. It is alleged that some Muslim men, with the pretext of love, they are wooing Hindu and Christian girls with an intention of converting them to Islam. Now courts and the government agencies, even the government of Kerala, and so many political commentators, everybody said that there is nothing called love jihad exists in this country, but Christian preachers tend to preach even in Zoom calls. What I'm trying to say is that they haven't preached only this; they have preached other stuff as well. But then this has been one of the major theme of the preaching. Why did they do that suddenly? Maybe because they just wanted to divert their attention from the COVID-induced existential crisis, or maybe because they have been already struggling with their second generation and the second generation's inclination toward multiculturalism and the issues involved with hybridity. But then it shows that at least during the COVID era, some influential Zoom preachers have engaged with post-truth politics and anti-Islamic discourse. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Alan, for the presentations. Now, let's go directly to the third presentations. Dr. Martin Akkad and Shadin Hani will be the presenters. Dr. Akkad is a director of Action Research Associates in Beirut. He teaches in the field of Islam, Middle Eastern Christianity, contextual hermeneutics, Christian-Muslim relations, and peace building. He is also heavily involved in grassroots dialogue and peace building work with Christian and Muslim faith actors and politicians in Lebanon. Dr. Akkad was an associate professor at the Arab Baptist Theological Seminary in Beirut, Lebanon for 19 years. After receiving his doctoral degree from the University of Oxford in the UK. He is the author of Sacred Misinterpretations, Reaching Across the Christian-Muslim Divide in 2019, and co-editor with the Jonathan Andrew of The Religious Other, A Biblical Understanding of Islam and the Quran and Muhammad in 2020. He has published numerous articles and book chapters in the fields of Islam, Christian, Muslim relations, and he blogs regularly at imes.blog. And the second speaker for the last presentation is Shadin Hani. She is a PhD candidate at the International Baptist Theological Study Center, Amsterdam. She holds a Bachelor in Theology from Arab Baptist Theological Seminary, Lebanon, and a master's degree in religions within the MENA region from the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies. Middle East Studies. Shadin's research currently includes peace and reconciliations through a multiple narratives approach, focusing on the current situation and reality of Lebanon, especially how to reach for forgiveness and reconciliation after the civil war. She works for the past 5 years as a researcher in peace-building initiatives with the Institute of Middle East Studies. She also co-managed 3 initiatives revolving around peace-building and reconciliation. Her work includes a network of religious leaders and politicians and is specialized in the development and implementation of dialogue and reconciliation in the local communities. So, Dr. Akkad and Shadin, the time is yours.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers of this conference for inviting us to share our experience. My colleague Shadin, Hani, and I will be sharing with you about activities that we led over the past 2 years of pandemic crisis, but that are also rooted in work that we've been doing for over 17 years at the Baptist Seminary and specifically out of the Institute of Middle East Studies there. We bring you a case study from Lebanon on Christian-Muslim relations in the midst of pandemic. And I'm going to give a little bit of a background on Lebanon as a country, the challenging context. Shadin will then describe some of the initiatives that we led, and then I will do a closing reflection as well as give some theological framework to think through. We seek to address today in our presentation are whether religion advances the common good in society, particularly within a sectarian context such as Lebanon. And secondly, whether religion can be used intentionally to cross sectarian lines in times of crisis and pandemic. The reason why these questions are not as obvious as they might sound is because of the complex reality of Lebanon's history as well as present and as we consider the future of a country like ours. Most of you are probably aware that Lebanon has 18 officially recognized sects or denominations. This system has been referred to as a confessional democracy. The system of Lebanon is meant to guarantee equal representation for all the parts of Lebanese society, but it also in reality tends to reinforce sectarian identity at the expense of a shared commitment and common vision for the country and a sense of common good. In practice, it also encourages clientelism in government structures and economics, as each sectarian leader tries to foster loyalty within their followers by giving favors, contracts, jobs. Lebanon has a history that is marked by a number of significant pacts. The first of which is considered to have been the founding pact of Lebanon in 1943. As a result of the National Pact of 1943, Lebanon emerged as a Western, an Arab, a Muslim, and a Christian state all at once. It also led, however, to divided loyalties, a sense of crisis in identity, a questioning of a sense of a common vision, and it quite often pit Christianity and Islam and along with all of their subsects face to face at different times of our history. The second significant pact of our history was the one that brought the 15 years of civil war between 1975 and 1990 contributed to bringing that war to an end. That's the Ta'if Accord that took place in 1988. On paper, the Ta'if Accord calls for the abolition of political confessionalism, But in practice, once again, it brought armed conflict. While bringing armed conflict to a stop, it nevertheless tended to reinforce sectarianism, and it also promoted the Sunni community to dominance, and usually at the expense of the previously dominant Maronite community of Lebanon. 2005 was a year of crisis. The crisis began with the assassination of Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, who at the time had just resigned from his position as Prime Minister on the 14th of February of 2005. That was followed by the forced withdrawal of Syrian military and intelligence presence from Lebanon after several decades of control. And that took place a few months later in May of 2005. The 2005 crisis also led to a new Sunni Shiite divide. In 2006, this divide was further exacerbated when Israel aggressed Lebanon in retaliation for an incursion of Hezbollah and a capture of 2 soldiers. And the conflict led eventually to the significant rise in popularity of Hezbollah, as they were considered to have been the victors in that conflict because Israel had not been able to achieve its primary goals from the attack. In 2008, as Hezbollah was mounting in popularity and power, there was an attempt to clamp down on its control of the ports and the airport, as well as on its telecommunications network that they had developed in parallel to the Lebanese state system. And Hezbollah took to the streets and immediately took control of strategic positions. And the crisis was quenched or quelled fairly quickly through what became known as the Doha Accord. And one of the results of the Doha Accord was the rise to dominance of more formally of the Shiites in Lebanon, this time at the expense of the Sunnis that had acquired prominence in the Ta'if Accord. The country shifted from a Sunni-dominated culture of affluence that had been triggered and led by Hariri as a shrewd businessman who led the country a bit like a business venture for 15 years. And then after his assassination in 2005, the emergence and rise and dominance of what Hezbollah themselves refer to as ثقافة المقاومة, or the culture of resistance. The year 2020 was the year of trauma. By summer of 2019, all the signs of an impending economic breakdown were clear. It led to an outburst of popular protests that began on the 17th of October due to the rapidly deteriorating socioeconomic and political conditions. The whole thing was exacerbated by the public health emergency brought on by COVID-19 by late February, early March 2020. And the final blow with the horrific chemical explosion at the Beirut port on August 4, 2020. This port explosion was the most flagrant manifestation of a failed and incompetent state system. There were several implications to this past year. Local communities have fallen increasingly prey to the sectarian narratives that have been sustained by their respective leaders. Members of different religious sects often remained alienated from each other, despite at times living within the same city or neighborhood. And in light of this brief historical survey, it was clear to us at the Institute of Middle East Studies that peace-building initiatives and interfaith platforms had to be put forward and consolidated, and that they were a necessity to this intractable dilemma and conflict in Lebanon. And I will now pass on the microphone to my colleague, Shadin, who will share with you about 2 of those initiatives. Please unmute yourself, Shadin.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. And as a response to this complex realities of Lebanon, we started what we called a friendship network between church and mosque goers. And this friendship network was inspired by common Christian and Muslim faith values. The uniqueness of this network was that it was led by a steering team consisting of 3 Christians and 3 Muslim faith leaders. We decided to use as a method this scriptural reasoning, where we set up groups of 20 to 30 members from each congregation in the various places where the network was active, to explore the components of friendship, which are empathy, trust, and respect. The main features of scriptural reasoning is to bring different people together to read and reflect on their respective scriptures. It was not about seeking agreement, but rather about growing in our understanding of one another's traditions through a deeper exploration of texts and the possible interpretation across faith boundaries we can learn. I want to give you a brief idea of what we did with these 3 values. Like, for instance, with the value of empathy, we focused on the biblical story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus taught us how to be compassionate assistants and to give selfless service to those in need, regardless of religious background, race, color, or political allegiance. And in communities like Lebanon, where there's quite a bit of prejudice still across communities, there's always this us and them, this dichotomy. So we feel compelled to act in risk-taking love and empathy as taught by Jesus in the story of the Good Samaritan. Of course, we use the scriptures also from the Quran. And for this value, we use the verse from Surah Fussilat, which invites us to repel evil with good. And it continues to say, and your enemy will become like an intimate friend, but none will attain it except those who are steadfast in patience, and none will attain it except the very fortunate. So the focus here is on the concept of steadfastness and patience, which are quite close in meaning to that of empathy. The second value of friendship, which is trust. So we thought of cultivating among the participants in the steering in the groups of people from both congregation, some principles of dialogue which were adopted from other peace-building initiatives that we had, and which in their turn were adaptation from a group called The Feast, located in Birmingham, UK, in which some of our peace-building initiatives were in their network. So, for example, we cultivated the concept of listening to what everyone is saying, speaking positively of our own faith rather than negatively about other people's religion, to respect other people's view, even if they disagree with us, to be honest in what we say, do not force people to agree with our views, do not judge people present by what some people of their faith or community did in the past, probably acknowledge similarities and differences between our faith. The last value of respect, which comes from the Greek word timesate, which means honor or value. It's in the New Testament, it talks about respect quite often. And for this exercise, we used the story in the Gospel of John of Jesus's encounter with the Samaritan woman. Jesus showed her respect, although probably she was a socially marginalized woman from a background that were considered the enemies of the Jews. But ultimately, this Samaritan woman brought her whole community to meet the man who respected her enough to engage her in conversation. These values of friendship did not remain theoretical, but we decided when the pandemic hit us to build on this network of friendships and to put these values in action. And we wanted to act as an interfaith group in ways that firstly would show solidarity and compassion. So we designed relief project. And secondly, through an interfaith prayer video, because we felt that faith would bring hope and unity to the devastated communities. First, for the relief project, we decided altogether to start in a city called Tripoli. It is situated in the north of Lebanon. It's known for its deep economic needs and it has a volatile sectarian environment. So Christian and Muslim local clergies who were part of the friendship network jointly distributed food parcels and vouchers out of their churches and mosques to the most vulnerable families in their communities. So this is the first initiative we did. And the second one, it is an interfaith prayer video, which we will show you at the end of our presentation, where a group of religious leaders of Sunni, Shiite, Orthodox, Maronite, Evangelical, Druze, all together, each and everyone came relying on their scripture, from the scripture. They delivered a message of hope and unity to the community, and they put together this prayer to God from their own faith tradition. So this is me. Thank you, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Shadin.
Thank you.
I will close this presentation by giving you very briefly a bit of a theological reflection and draw some conclusions from these initiatives. The initiatives didn't grow out in a vacuum. They were set up based on an existing interfaith platform that we had been building for over 15 years. And there was also a theological framework for the work that we did. I use the term charismatic to describe this approach. The word charismatic comes from the Greek word kerygma, which means proclamation. In the New Testament, it's understood as the kerygma, or the proclamation of the good news, which was modeled by Jesus. And as we look at Jesus's kerygma, we find a proclamation that is both in word and action. The good news of this kerygma is Jesus inviting us to repentance, into God's kingdom that he inaugurated in his own person. The kerygma in the New Testament steers away from debate that is fruitless, and certainly also from the demonization of others, as we tried also to bring out in those scriptural reasoning sessions that Shadin referred to. The charismatic approach derived out of an exercise I did many years ago when I first arrived at the Baptist Seminary. Some or all of you are aware probably that Baptists in Lebanon and generally globally are on the more conservative side of evangelicalism. And the approaching the question of relations with someone from another faith and the question of dialogue immediately can bring negative connotations in the minds of conservative Christians. By the way, I would view myself in that camp as well. So I'm not pointing fingers by any means, but I'm trying to reflect on my community. In those conservative contexts, when you speak about dialogue and interacting with people of other faiths, you can quickly be accused of compromise and of syncretism. I've also experienced that in more liberal environment, if you excuse the labels, you can be viewed as approaching dialogue only for the purpose of polemics. So one of the first exercises I did in around 2004 was to begin to think about other possibilities between syncretism and polemics. And I decided to use a spectrum, because a spectrum has the advantage of offering an infinite number of possibilities along that spectrum, horizontally as well as vertically, to apply different perspectives on different elements of a faith that you are trying to understand and study and interact with. As I thought about the model of Jesus, I was quite sure that syncretism and polemics were not within the range of his ministry. But as I observed his ministry with faith leaders and with political leaders, there was a sense of working towards the Old Testament concept of shalom, of community peace, and which I would place in the box of existential, or under the heading of existential. On the other hand, as we know from the Gospels, people over and over came to him with questions and with sometimes with challenges. And Jesus had a tendency to use quite a gracious way of responding, except sometimes with religious leaders, because they should have known better. But with people who knew their state of poverty, both spiritually and otherwise, he used a gracious, apologetic, or responsive approach. And there is a lot in terms of good apologetics in the New Testament, even though there are also negative models that one should look out for. However, I would consider that Jesus spent most of his energy in what I would describe as the charismatic approach. And I would describe this as, therefore, devoid of polemical aggressiveness, devoid of apologetic defensiveness, of existential adaptiveness, and of syncretistic elusiveness. Jesus' approach was the proclamation of God's kingdom, an invitation to people into the kingdom of God through entering into a personal relationship with God whom he called Father. We can draw several lessons from the experience of these initiatives that we led over the past 2 years. First of all, after a brief evaluation that we carried out with members of our institute, as well as the religious leaders involved in the relief project, we received a lot of positive feedback from beneficiaries in Tripoli. It was clear that for people there to see a priest and a sheikh distributing together food parcels and vouchers to the most needy families, being able to lay aside their differences in order to serve the community together out of the church and out of the mosque, was incredibly impactful for many people. The prayer video, which you will see in a moment, was also very well received. As a result, Shadin and I had opportunity to go, and we were invited to speak on several TV talk shows as well as radio programs in order to explain what we were doing and to show the video to a broader audience. We experienced also breakthrough within our group of faith leaders. A few were initially hesitant to do this sort of interfaith prayer. Prayer, you know, as you enter the Holy of Holies when it comes to prayer. However, as they saw what their colleagues were doing, and as they saw that each was being asked to express their faith and their hope and their blessing through their own scripture and tradition, all of them became encouraged, and there was a breakthrough there as well. In closing, 3 reflections. First of all, the promotion of common religious values through interfaith dialogue can bring conflicting communities together. It can help them overcome the challenges that they are facing. That has been something that we've experienced over the past few years in Lebanon. Secondly, by combining principles of respect and love in engaging one another, but also rigorous academic exploration. So love and respect does not mean that you give up on your ability to think critically, both about yourself and about the other. Mutual understanding was increased, and we were able to build on commonalities and to search for paths to reconciliation and for the common good. And finally, our goal was to contribute even a small mustard seed to the growing field of Christian-Muslim dialogue and to be catalysts for change through a charismatic, Christ-centered approach, which we believe can be reproduced in other parts of our multi-faith world. Thank you very much. And I will now ask our colleagues to run the video, the Interfaith video.
شبكة الصداقة بين رواد الكنائس والمساجد قررت تجمع صلوات وأدعية من رجال دين مسيحيين ومسلمين بهالفترة اللي مرقين فيها بمحنة وطنية. نرفع صلواتنا ومنركز على الأمور اللي بتجمعنا، نتضرع لشعبنا، لأرضنا، لإله السماء إنه يتحنن علينا ويشفينا.
يا ربنا وإلهنا، نتوجه إليك بقلوبنا وعقولنا وأرواحنا، ونتضرع إليك لكي تنظر فينا وتحفظ بلدنا لبنان بطوائفه وأبنائه، لأنك أنت يا الله الحارس والحامي لنا والملجأ والأمان.
يا رب، أبعد عنا كل الشرور والأحزان وكل الأوبئة والمصائب. يا رب، استجب لكل من دعاك وكل من يرفع إليك يديه بالصلاة والدعاء يا رب العالمين.
اللهم أفض على بلدنا سلامك ورحمتك، وأعطنا حكمة في سلوكنا وكلامنا، وساعدنا كي نقترب منك ونستلهم منك ومن تعاليمك وأن نطيع وصاياك.
يا إلهنا الحي ينبوع المحبة، أسمع بلدنا وشعبنا كلمتك. لا تخافوا، نور الطريق بعيدا عن الجوع والموت، يا ملجانا ورجانا.
نتوب إليك يا الله ونطلب عفوك ورحمتك، فاسكب في قلوبنا محبة ورحمة لبعضنا البعض.
نتوجه إليك يا الله بكل انتماءاتنا لكي تحفظ وحدتنا في الإنسانية وتجعلنا متحابين متآخين تحت اسمك، وأن تجعل بلدنا لبنان نموذجا للسلام والمحبة.
كما نطلب منك يا الله أن تنظر في وضع هذا العالم المتألم وجميع شعوب الأرض التي تترجى رحمتك.
اللهم احفظنا بحفظك شيبا وشبابا وشبانا وعجائز ورضع يا أكرم الأكرمين. تولنا فيمن توليت، وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت، وقنا واصرف عنا ما نحن فيه يا أكرم الأكرمين. يا رب، اصرف عنا الوباء والغلاء والبلاء يا أكرم الأكرمين. يا رب، اغفر لنا وارحمنا وتب علينا، إنك أنت التواب الرحيم.
إلهي بعفوك وجودك نسألك اللطف بعبادك المستضعفين، وأن تقينا شر هذا الوقت الأليم، وأن تمدنا بسعة إحسانك، وأن تعيننا وتقوينا بالصبر والتقوى وقوة اليقين. آمين آمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين.
نحن على يقين إنه الله بيسمع صلواتنا، لأنه هو خالقنا، هو بحبنا. كرمال هيك ندعيكم تنضموا لموجة هالتضرعات وتشاركوا بهالتسجيل بشكل واسع ليوصل لكل أحبائكم بلبنان والعالم. آمين يا رب.
Amin, amin, amin. What a wonderful closing. Thank you, Shadin, for sharing this video. Okay, so yeah, before we go to the Q&A sessions, I would like to invite our panelists here. If you want to ask each others about the what's the similarities or the differences about amongst the way Christian Muslims communities in Indonesia, India, and Lebanon responded or overcome the challenges. Yeah, you can start from whoever want to start the questions. Okay. Lucy, are you sure? So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I addressed my question to Alan Joseph, and I wrote my question into his chat box. I was wondering actually how Christian Muslim in India dealing with the COVID-19 tsunami some weeks ago. How has been religious leaders in Christianity and Islam playing active roles in dealing with the case? Yeah, that's my question for Alan Joseph, and I think I want to address also my question to Martin Akkad and then Shadin. I like the Arabic Fusha, and I think Mas Abdila also understand the Arabic Fusha. And my question was that I think the issue of Israeli Palestinians is still hot up to now. Personally, what will be your view, your point of view about actually the Christian and Muslim stance in this issue? I know that it was really a long story and long case about this issue. I mean, Israel and Palestinian. I think that's all. Thank you.
So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, though. And you know, there are. I was so happy to be able to listen to your presentation, Luki and Dr. Hans, and I was so happy, and I was so encouraged by the power of humanity, and then the power of tolerance and stuff like that. And maybe things are good in this end of the world also. But recently, over the last 5 years, I have been watching that some radical preachers from both sides, they used to be very famous even otherwise, even before pandemic. And people used to share their videos in social media platforms and YouTube and different places. But then I kind of noticed that these people started their own YouTube channel and Facebook Live. And many of them were, even if they just post something, in 1 or 2 days, it's 100,000, 200,000. And Facebook Live, I was literally watching a pastor was preaching about, how to deal with Islam and Muslims, and then, how to answer Islam, those kind of stuff. It was 835 or 38 Facebook Live viewers. And so what I was trying to say is that out of these people I was talking about, 5 of them started their own channel, YouTube channel, so successfully running. And in the same way, there was this very famous Nadwatul Mujahideen, a preacher, who never had a YouTube channel of his own, but then he started his own. And then there was a recent Christian, a Muslim convert from Christianity, especially from the Pentecostal background, from my hometown. He's kind of a very, very attractive figure in the movement now. And his channel is recently started 4 months back. So in the social media, I don't see so many good stuff. That's my conclusion. So the polemic is I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm biased, but then I don't see much good stuff, especially when I talk about the radical Christians, and then the Mujahideens, we call the the Salafi Muslims in India are concerned. And there are things happening in the ecumenical world, but unfortunately in the denomination in which I am a part, in this Christian-Muslim relationship, especially in the social media, it's not a good news.
Okay. Yeah, I hope that's answer your question, Lutfi.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay. So, and Dr. Akkad and Shadin.
Yes.
I don't know how to. Please go ahead.
It's a big question, of course, and in some ways not directly related to our topic, but in other ways quite related, because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very integrated with religion and faith. In Palestine, of course, the Christians and Muslims have a strong sense of solidarity in terms of the injustices that the Palestinians are living. But I want to turn more to the situation in Lebanon, because this is my area of work and life. And the Palestinian issue, of course, has been very significant in our history. The first time I met Israeli Arabs in Oxford, they came and greeted me with a little bit of embarrassment, and I couldn't understand why. And then after a little bit, they said, "Well, don't you hate us?" And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, we always hear that it was because of the Palestinian issue that the Lebanese civil war started in 1975. So it took me by surprise, but I realized that you had here a community that had been a victim and victimized on all sides, that then was also carrying the burden of responsibility for having truly been cause for triggering conflict in Lebanon. So they were not wrong about that, but to have to bear that collectively was quite striking. In Lebanon, this whole issue definitely has an interfaith aspect. There is strong solidarity between Christians and Muslims on the Palestinian question. Sometimes maybe there needs to be a little bit more cool head on it, because often Christians and Muslims get together and feel solidarity simply because they can find a common enemy to bash, but that's not enough, and that's the wrong motivation. But the ability to explore questions like that from a faith perspective, to look at what scriptures in both traditions have to say, that can increase peace and diminish conflict or diminish war, is extremely important. Unfortunately, that's often also sensitive, because the moment you speak the word peace, people immediately think that you're being paid by foreign agents in order to get rid of the Palestinian cause. And so even the word peace has become a dirty word sometimes. And I think as faith leaders on both sides, there's a responsibility for emphasizing the importance of God's peace, which does not look away from justice. And so the question of, can we have peace without doing wrong to justice is very important, I think. And there are many answers to that in both of our traditions that we must struggle with from a theological and practical perspective. And finally, a final reflection on the fact that I come from an evangelical community, and evangelicals globally have a responsibility when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because of what many call Christian Zionism, or perhaps a Zionist interpretation of the scriptures, which has been very strong in the Protestant tradition and today remains quite strong within the evangelical community, particularly in North America. Although, again, we shouldn't think that all evangelicals are Zionists, because that sometimes is what seems to come across when people talk about it. Is at least half of American evangelicals are not Zionists. But we certainly have a responsibility as a community globally to address this, what I would call a heresy within our tradition. I often tell my Muslim friends that they have a responsibility to address the theology, quote unquote, of a group like ISIS, even if they believe they are not true Muslims, just as I have the responsibility to deal with the heresy of Christian Zionism, even if I think it is wrong theology. So we have to deal with our own for the sake of better relations across faiths and for the common good of our societies globally.
Shadin, do you have any comments?
Well, it is, this topic is a big, your question is a big question. It needs a webinar, a whole webinar. As Dr. Martin presented at the beginning of our presentation, Lebanon was not exempt, is not exempt from the events that are happening in the Middle East. So there is a long history, and the proximity, the geographical position of Lebanon puts it in a very critical place. I believe we come from a background of peace and reconciliation. So I believe this would be our approach. It's like Dr. Martin said, there's no stance of between Christians and Muslims towards the injustices that are being done or have been done throughout the history of our shared existence here in the Middle East. So I believe many work has been done on musalaha by theologians like Salim Munayyar, and we still have the responsibility, all of us, to really approach this issue, to think theologically about these problems that we are having in the Middle East and are affecting all our lives and the evangelical church primarily. So yes, I believe we have this responsibility towards the suffering, the injustice that are happening here in this spot.
Thank you, Shadin. Yeah, so let's back to our topics now. Indeed, the ideas of tolerance in Indonesia, common goods, I think, in Lebanon, and religious identity, or the diaspora of the Pentecostal groups in India. They have the kind of double edge of good and bad, and how the political, social, economic factors affected the interpretations and the implementation of these ideas in reality. So we do have 3 questions and 1 comment. Yeah, let's start from the Dr. Ivan Omar. He has question to Hans and Lutfi. So yeah, thank you Hans and Lutfi for your exposition and analysis. I have often wondered if placing too much emphasis on religious identity as opposed to speaking about cultural and other forms of identities complicates and exacerbates the conflict. Culturally, food, language, geography, etc., people in many parts of Indonesia are closer to each other. Then why not focus on common cultural identities and celebrate these? Perhaps this will minimize the impact of the hate mongers who divide based on religions. Another questions for the for Hans and Lutfi is that if COVID-19 has become a common enemy for Muslim and Christians, are the lessons that we can learn from this moving forward? I think this question also implied to all speakers here. And another question from Dr. Grafton is that Zoom and YouTube are tools to be used for those interested in ecumenisms or interfaith works, as well as those who are fundamentalists, as the examples have shown. What more can be done to support the use of technology for positive messages between peoples? And yeah, this the three questions for all speakers here. And there is one comments from Dr. Irfan Omar about the video. Yeah, thank you for sharing about this project of hope and peace. I would have liked to see more women in the video. Yeah, we need more Shadins there. Yeah, I think this is the challenge for the challenge for all the interreligious dialogue activities to involve women in the process. So yeah, let's start with Hans and Lutfi, and then we go through again to Alan and Dr. Akkad and Shadin. Yeah, please go ahead.
Lutfi, do you want to start or should I?
Okay, I can start first and then you can make it larger probably. I would say that, thank you, Dr. Irfan Omar. I would say that particularly Hans has brought up the issue which culture which culture became the main element to cope with Muslim-Christian conflict in Ambon, even though not in how is it, in very particular or probably longer description, but Hans has brought up the case. We went to the culture where the culture became the main element to cement, to tie up the conflict among Muslim and Christian in Ambon. The culture of respecting otherness actually has been embedded in the Indonesian people back to the Indonesian history centuries ago. Even though in probably some decades ago, there was, because political agenda, there was ethnicity cleansing, I believe. But then Indonesia has become again peaceful. Until recently, the transnational movement came to Indonesia with the radical Muslim, so to speak. They tried to break the diversity of Indonesia dealing with this issue. And then Nahdlatul Ulama, one of the biggest Muslim organization, promoted Islam Nusantara, and then Muhammadiyah with Islam Berkemajuan. These two organizations try to voice up the contextual Islam to resist or to fight for the rigid Islam brought by the transnational movement, i.e. the radical Muslim. So, so to speak, I will answer that we have been trying to deal with that, Dr. Irfan Omar. Islam Nusantara, Islam that has been valued with the contextual Javanese Indonesia and the culture of Indonesia has been brought up, has been promoted to deal with the rigid Islam brought by the transnational movement. I think Hans will lengthen the explanation. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you to Lutfi and to Dr. Irfan Omar for the questions and comment. And the simple reasoning why we cannot focus only on cultural identities and geographical location, because we simply too diverse in terms of ethnicities and religious traditions. So it's not possible to rely only on cultural similarities. It works in some places like Ambon and Poso, but even during the conflict in Ambon, the tradition of Pelagando could not stop the conflict. Although from our respondent in the village that we focus on in the slide, the 4 villages that binded by the Pelagando did not experience brutal conflict. Instead, they protect each other. So the Muslims will protect Christians and vice versa. So it works to some extent. But when terrible conflict in a larger scale happen, it's no longer possible. I think there are different key factors playing here, including the government, so the state apparatus involvement and the military as well. But in some places it works. So cultural, the commonality can glue people together, but for some it doesn't, because we are just too different. In my case, I think I'm a Chinese Christian. I mean, I'm Chinese Indonesian, but I do not have that much attachment to Chinese culture. I understand more Japanese language, which is spoken by Lutfi, than Chinese language. So for me, my Christian identity has been part and parcel of my core identity. I feel myself as a Christian and Indonesian rather than a Chinese person or other cultural identity. So there is this hybrid identities embedded in different people that makes it not possible just to focus on one. And also many people still consider religious identity as central to their identity. So it's important to put commonalities here. I think the initiative that's been done by Shadin and Dr. Akkad is really important to focus on religiosity. But of course, that's not only the case. In Indonesia, we need to build up on other issues. Yeah, I think that's my response to Dr. Irfan Omar. So I will return it to moderator.
We can chip in a little bit, although it was not directly related to the Kerala Malayali situation, but I think there is something that I also want to contribute, which is my land, Kerala, is one of the very few places in India which didn't have any communal tension. We never had much major communal tension in the history, but we definitely did not have any problem during the Babri Masjid's demolition in 1992. But had it been today, I don't know the situation. Identity, is multiple, as we all know, and sometimes situation demands which take precedence. For example, Trump, when he was in office, even before that, he used to be known as a good friend of Narendra Modi, our prime minister, because of the right-wing attitude. And even before he was even campaigning for the presidency, he visited India, and everyone was so happy with him and stuff like that. But then once he was in office, Indians are one of the people groups that he offended quite often, especially in terms of the job prospects. Many times he said that, Indians are taking away, robbing our jobs, especially with H-1B visa and stuff like that. And so traditionally, I believe that the Hindu diaspora in India is traditionally, it is sidelining with the Democrats. And especially because of this job prospect, many people had to come back, and then many people were waiting to go to US, couldn't go so far. So they were all, even those among the diaspora who were supporting the Republicans, shifted their side, and they began to be even more democratic. But in spite of that, the Indian diaspora, the Malayali Pentecostal diaspora I was talking about, they increased their support to Trump during the very last campaign. So what really happened there, I think, an identity politics played the part there. These people, the Malayali Pentecostals, their youngsters, they also wanted to get this lucrative American jobs, but they thought, even beyond that, they were more concerned about the religious identity, I think, the evangelical kind of identity. So I think identity sometimes, most of the time, it is complex, it is multiple. So I don't know. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, we can, Dr. Akkad and Shadin, we can respond to the questions. You want to respond?
Shadin, why don't you have more women in the video?
Yes, I hope we don't come to this to do a video, a prayer video to bring hope. I really hope not to be forced to do that anymore. But next time, if the situation invites us to do such a thing, I promise to bring on more women. Actually, we had some not resistance, but we had scarcity in the way, in where we wanted to look and where we were able to look. It was a pandemic. We were at our homes, so the communication was not that easy. So we were not able to meet new people. Although that the friendship network included some women of faith, but not everyone was encouraged to participate. Like Dr. Akkad said at the beginning, some people were hesitant to actually participate in such a video. So we had a nun in the video, and I was there. But next time we will try to make it half-half, hopefully, and to encourage more women to study theology and become, women of faith, of religion. So this is my answer to you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Umar, for bringing the issue.
That is a problem for all of us, isn't it? All of our faith communities. When we want to have an impact on faith communities, often we want to enlist preachers and khuttab because they have the ear of the community at least once a week. But I think women also in certain traditions have quite a strong role in the faith community, and certainly we can all push for more of that and more participation.
Sure. We believe that there are many actually. But please don't be discouraged with these situations. So we are on the edge of the agenda. So I'm not trying to conclude everything that we have discussed, but let's start with the keyword, the first keyword that Hans and Lutfi raised in their work about the ambiguity of tolerance, how much we have to tolerate the others, and then it led to the questions about the common goods. Should we appreciate more the commonalities, or should we appreciate more to the difference of otherings of the others? So that's related to the Dr. Omar's concerns. Yeah, that's, and also we go back to the issue of should we raise the religious identity or the other identity, because we have many identities in this context: political, religious, ethnical, and many more. In regarding our main topic about the pandemics, yeah, the big question is whether the awareness of the dangers of the pandemics narrows the gap between Christian Muslim communities, in the sense that they try to overcome the danger, or the pandemic has shifted the way Christian and Muslims encounter each other, interact with each other, and get involved in religious engagements from in-persons, offline, to online. In this case, we have the positive impact of the using of Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, or any others social media. That's we, as the proponent of the peace narrative and in religious engagements, this time we can float these channels with the good news, peace narrative that can overcome the hatred, the social segregations. However, there is kind of the negative impact or the setback. That's how to deal with the hoax, or how to deal with the challenge of the difference of receptions by the audience from the online messages. How the peace messages from Indonesia can be well received in India or Lebanon, or vice versa, or in the. So yeah, that's the bigger challenge from the from our online world now. So yeah, I think that's conclude our. Hopefully, it's conclude our conversation today. Thank you very much for all presenters here, Hans, Lutfi, Alan, Dr. Akkad, and Shadin. Yeah, see you next.
Yeah.
Dr. Grafton, are you going to?
Yeah, I'll say a few words. Thank you, Mohammed, for moderating, and thank you to all the panelists for your presentations. This won't be the end of the conversation, because their papers will ultimately be published in an upcoming edition of the Muslim World Journal, which is published by Hartford Seminary. So those of you attending will be able to refer back to them, as well as to this recording, which will be posted on our website when it's done. So thank you to all of you for presenting, for your insights. It's clear that the pandemics have created reaches beyond communities, across nations, across the world, across communities. And the question is, what kind of narrative will ultimately be more sustainable for us? And we hope it's one of peace. I invite you all back this evening in about 6 hours for our final session, where we will be looking at interfaith in the arts, an acting troupe called Silk Road Rising. We'll talk about their interfaith activities and how they were impacted by the pandemics and how they took their narrative virtual. Thank you all. Again, thank you for the panelists, and have a good evening, a good morning, or a good afternoon.